That's the end of the gin and
Otherwise,
tonic
I think that at this point they should know how to make a gin and tonic. So I think we're safe there.
So we're drinking. Hello and welcome to episode 189 of the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast, part of the Marketing Podcast Network. It's Saturday the 28th of October. I hope you've had a great week and you are well and staying as sane as you feel you need to be. I'm your host, Ian Truscott. I'm a CMO, but no rockstar. And with the help of my guests and chums that I've met on my journey from sysadmin to CMO, I want to share the marketing street knowledge that we hope will inspire the marketing rockstar in you. Come say hello. You can find links to me and my guests at rockstarcmo.com or follow us on LinkedIn. This week in the marketing studio, ex-Forrester research director Jeff Clark and I dive down the marketing ROI rabbit hole, and my chum and content marketing guru Robert Rose shares a thought about the demise of Twitter and organic social over a cocktail in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar. But first, we need to pay the bar tab. I'll be back in a moment.
We'll be right back. We'll be right back.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Heiler hosts a fantastic podcast called Own It. Christy, tell us more about the show.
Own It is all about celebrating women and non-binary advertising agency owners. We talk about buying out of the Boys Club of Advertising because less than 1% of ad agencies are owned by women.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find the podcast at untilyouownit.com. We're also on the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe.
To our first segment, the Rockstar CMO studio with Jeff Clark, our resident strategy advisor, former Forrester research director, and my opportunity to get some free advice. In the continuation from last week's chat about budget, we dive into marketing ROI.
Whoa, Ian, how are you doing today?
I'm all right, mate. How are you?
I am doing well. I have a beautiful sunny autumn day. Was out for a walk, and I see out your back window. It looks reasonably nice there in the United Kingdom.
Yeah. Yes. It started pretty miserable, but we've had beautiful blue skies, and I too have been for a little stroll earlier on as well. So yes,
I was inspired by one of my old colleagues from a company, Pegasystems, who actually is in the UK. Might actually live around the corner from you. Actually, live south of London, and they had posted a picture of their lovely sunny day. Nice. So that was inspired me to get out for a walk.
Nice, cool. So that's so we've had the same weather, which makes a change. So
yes.
All right. So this week we are. Well, last week for the regular listeners, not for the regular listeners. I mean, last week.
Yeah, people can go back and listen to it.
Yes, yeah. It's a fact for everybody. Is that last week we talked about budgeting as it's budget season. I was thinking of Elmer Fudd then. But that's going back. Budget season, rabbit season. No, anyway, so
going down the rabbit hole. That's where
exactly. So we did skip across the rabbit hole of ROI, and we thought, well, we'll come back to that. And here we are. We're coming back to it.
We're back,
and we're going to go down the rabbit hole of ROI. So, as I understand it, and you are so wonderful to me, Jeff, in that you come up with 5 things. You've got 5 effing ROI rules to live by, I understand. So what say you, Jeff?
Well, it is when we were tiptoeing over that rabbit hole last week, and I was thinking about the fact that, I've been, you've been, we've all been in meetings where some executive says, well, we're running that expensive, user conference. We're going to that trade show again. What's the return on that? Yeah. And we're doing all these webcasts. So we see you guys are busy. But what are you doing that's impacting revenue? And it's very easy to get caught in an ROI discussion, that goes worse than down a rabbit hole, leads you off a cliff unless you kind of do your homework up front. So that's what the rules to live by is, kind of doing the homework up front to be able to talk about ROI. for marketing.
Nice, but before you do the thing and then have to justify it afterwards.
Yeah, really.
All right, mate. So what's your first?
Well, the first is to know the difference between measures that have impact on the business and measures of output, activity. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we can measure in marketing, and impact are things that affect the goals of the business and they're meaningful to the executive team. And those are different than when you get into, what we would categorize as kind of outputs. So leads, attendees to seminars or conferences, the number of meetings you set up, those are all outputs of the activity that you did. And sometimes you report on activity, this is the number of webinars we've done, or this is, blah, 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 the number of pieces of material we created for the sales enablement program. So those can be important, but if anyone says, well, what's the return on that? Then you gotta like say, well, let's go back and let's talk about our the things that we're doing that have impact, and maybe how some of those outputs and activity actually rolled up into that. So number one is no impact measures, which tend to be, what do we do to impact revenue, pipeline, market share, brand, profitability, customer satisfaction. Those are all things that are of interest to the executive team.
Right. So this is measuring out. You've said measure impact, but really this is measuring outcomes, not output. Is that a good summary?
That's another way of looking at it. Outcomes is another way of looking at it. But outcomes can be interpreted a number of ways, but we want it to be outcomes that are, or impacts that are relevant to the executive team. Right.
I like that. So that's number one. Know the difference between impact measures of output or activity. What's number two?
So number two is to define, measurable, impactful goals, for marketing. So let's just talk at the high level. Your marketing department, what are the things that you are doing that have a contribution to revenue, influenced, sourced, engaged, pipeline, whatever it is? What have you done are you doing that's impacting brand? What are those goals? What are you doing that impacted customer satisfaction? I just want to note, we did episode 171, which wasn't too long ago, on brand measurement. So there are ways. Some people usually think about brand measurement. They think, oh my God, year-long annual brand studies. And it's like, no, there's other things you can do. What have we done that impacts sales productivity? That's obviously something that's of high value to the executive team. So are there things that we're doing that where we can show that we're improving their sales ability to get revenue, or doing it more profitably? So when you're thinking about, these impacts, it's like, do we have goals? Because we got to set goals. Are they measurable? Because it's nice to have nice fluffy goals, but you want to set measurable goals. And then back to our first rule, are those measures actually impactful, or are they something that is on the road to delivering the impact?
Right, okay. And we've talked about goals and KPIs and OKRs quite a lot, haven't we, on the show? So this kind of just gets back to that. But the extension of that conversation really is, how do we then apply that to spend and revenue? And that specific business goal that's basically around cash, right? So and so often it's, certainly in the decades in which marketing started to turn to be around demand and impacting revenue, it was always about sourced revenue or pipeline, influenced revenue, pipeline, how many meetings you set that led to opportunities, or what's your engagement with opportunities, and that's another rabbit hole, which we may have talked in the past or can talk about in the future. But that's the typical one. But you don't want to stop there, because there may be other things you're doing that are impacting the business level goals. All right. Well, I better crack on, because I know you've got a hard stop, mate. So just remember that.
Okay.
So number three. What's your number three?
Well, is to avoid discussions of tactic level ROI, because kind of like in the setup, we're talking about, we do this event every year and it costs a lot of money. What's the ROI on it? And the reason you don't want to get into that discussion is that, any particular tactic is like one or two touches on an opportunities journey. So, you can measure the effectiveness of that particular tactic based on your goals for the tactic, based on benchmarks, historical trends. Last year we got so many people to the user conference. This year we got 20% more. But you want to make sure that it's like, you want to get into the discussion about, well, during the customer journey, we have determined that this tactic is important. Or we've actually, we may have said if somebody's pushing back on, why we run so many webinars, and we ran the numbers and we found out that it really wasn't that important to the customer's journey. So you want to be able to basically continue that, or try to put a stop to that discussion as you're avoiding the discussion about tactical level ROI. It says, well, we've determined that tactic is important. I can't deliver you an ROI from a revenue perspective, but I could tell you that against whatever, the goals we set or the benchmarks we've set or what we've been able to do in the past, this is an important tactic and it is actually doing better for us.
Right. Okay. So the difference there is, because I really like this one, avoiding the discussion tactic, because it's so often that's what we do. I mean, you see it all the time. I mean, discussion in my day job about PPC, for example. I think the impact of PPC isn't just on direct revenue. You also it creates awareness and all this other stuff, right? And brand and all that kind of, and those are harder things to measure. But I really like that phrase you used there, that any tactic is only one or two touches on the opportunity's journey. So if you're doing these ROI calculations, you need to try and roll up all of the touches that opportunity may have had, which is quite a difficult thing to argue for, isn't it? Because you're basically saying, here's some budget for marketing, and in return I shall give you this return. I can't tell you exactly how. Almost, because then it's actually, no, you've answered the question, because the value of the tactic is that actually the goal is that it attracts more people to a webinar or something like that. You may not be able to do the ROI attribution on a monetary level, but you can see that it made a contribution to a lower level goal, which eventually leads to revenue, right?
Right, which actually gets to number 4 on my rules to live by.
Goody.
So are you going to ask me what number 4 is?
Yes, what's number 4? I thought you were rolling straight into it and got bored with listening to me. So,
no, you told me never, don't roll into the next one.
Well, the thing is, it's my only job. If I don't get a chance to say, what's number 4, Jeff, then I don't really play a role in this podcast. What's number 4, Jeff?
Is to allocate those, so at the top level of marketing, we have, measurable, impactful goals. So let's ladder those down or allocate them down to campaigns. And by campaigns, I mean, basically multi-tactic, integrated sets of work that are going to, transpire over the year or maybe the proportion of the year. And whether you're doing it by audience or buyer need, like we often talk about, or product, whatever it is, you want to say, we're running 3 or 4 big campaigns, and let's just take our contribution to pipeline is X, and 30% of that X is going to campaign 1, 30% of that X is campaign 2, and 30% is campaign 3. And then when you get into and this is why I said it kind of relates back to the tactics, is like they said, well, if we're doing this campaign and let's say we're focused on HR executives for buying our product. And it's like, well, we know HR executives, they go to this conference. We know that they read these types of papers. They follow this type of particular community. And that's why we chose those things. And those things seem to be successful, and they're helping us deliver on the goal for our HR campaign. And so if you take that next level down, you can both set goals that are impactful, you can measure them, and you can tie it to something that is of concern to the executive team.
Right. So this is, again, a topic that we've discussed on the podcast a number of times about OKRs and goals and stuff. This stuff just laddering right down, isn't it, into what are the goals of this campaign and what are the goals of this tactic, and it all sort of ladders back up again to revenue or whatever our OKR is there. So that's number 4. So just as a recap, so number 1, we know the difference between our impact measures and output or activity. Number 2, define measurable, impactful goals for marketing. Number 3, avoid discussions of tactic level ROI. It'd be great if I could read the notes. And number 4, you just did allocate measurable, impactful goals for the campaign. What's your 5th and final one?
So determine how large-scale projects serve those campaigns.
Right.
So, and this is where you get to the big chunky things like a user conference or this monster trade show that you appear to every year. And, or you're doing something. I mean, I've been in a number of companies where we put a ton of effort into sales enablement, and so you're developing a lot of content. You're making that available. You're hopefully improving productivity. It doesn't fit within a campaign. I mean, any of these things you could say, well, it spans campaigns or it doesn't fit within one. So you've got to figure out, out of those top level goals for marketing, if you attributed so much or allocated so much to a set of campaigns, then does this big chunky thing, does it fit into one of those? Does it span a couple of them? Or do you just need to set it aside and work on how you can, like sales enablement tools and stuff like that? I mean, you can follow trends in improvement of sales productivity and success against sales goals or shortening sales cycles, and try to make correlations between what you guys did versus something that is impactful. So it's probably the one of the harder nuts of the things that we've talked about so far. But it's one you'll run across again if you've got any of these big large scale projects that don't fit into some set of demand gen work.
Yeah, especially if you do a large event because it's good for the CEO's ego. It never has a return.
Never been involved in that.
But I think the sales enablement, and I think we've got a few minutes. The sales enablement thing is an interesting point because that doesn't just cover sales enablement. That is like almost all of product marketing and many of the things that sit within the marketing function but are not direct contributors to revenue, right? But you've got to have that. And how do you measure the ROI of sales enablement? How do you measure the ROI of product marketing or even to a certain extent content marketing, right? Because you're looking at a different set of metrics for those, aren't you? And this is actually a discussion I'm having during the day, which is I have a content marketing, product marketing team, and the leader of that is like, looking at their goals, and their goals are not revenue based. Their goals are based on enablement, building community, building an audience, thinking like a publisher, thinking like a media organization, and reach. We need to create different metrics for different parts of our organization as well as different parts of a campaign, right?
I think it's and this is a conundrum or a tough one to crack because you are creating, and typically when this becomes important to the executive team, is when there's a sales productivity problem. We have a low percentage of, or I should say, we have a high percentage of the sales force that are not meeting quota. We have a high percentage of the sales force who are complaining about the access to materials. We have people. The one company worked that we were changing messaging, and we have a sales force that doesn't understand the new messaging and doesn't think it's important. So now there's a effort that needs to happen. But hopefully, since executives always look at sales productivity metrics. How quick is it to get from opening an opportunity to closing it? What's our win rate? And so since they look at through microscopes at that stuff, it is something that you can say, okay, this is the work that we did, and we're seeing an improvement in whatever those important metrics are that have to do with sales productivity.
Yeah, I think this is almost a rabbit hole in itself here, because this is marketing's role in improving sales efficiency. And yet, if your marketing team aren't necessarily going to be measured on that, if they're measured on the number of opportunities they create, or the number of leads they create, or the number of MQLs they create, they're not measured on sales efficiency and stuff. So I think if you're doing those functions, then you've really got to look at what the OKRs of your marketing team are, aren't they? They're then beyond just a marketing revenue contribution.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Well, I know you got a hard stop, my friend. So let's get to the third and final part of our agenda, which is the song. What are we going for this week?
We are going to go back to 1974 at your suggestion, so I just want to point that out, to a James Brown classic called Payback.
Yes.
Which, I mean, it fits because if you think about what we're trying to arm our listeners with, we want them to be able to say, as James Brown says in quotes, "Get ready, you mother, for the big payback."
Yes.
Because I'm going to deliver it to you.
I love it. Yeah, and the reason why I chose this again is I think we've had a song from the theme of Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, which is one of my favourite films. So it's on that thing. So just as my excuse for why we are really dipping into the classics week after week.
It makes me want to spin in the chair and go, "Ow!" You know.
Well, I think you did well with reading out that line. Get ready, you mother, for the big payback. All right, so I'll play out with that. And I'm giving you a break from the studio next week because I'm actually speaking to David Alexandra, the CMO of Everbridge. So we'll see you in 2 weeks' time, Jeff.
Awesome.
I look forward to it, my friend. I'll see you then.
Okay.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The brother getting ready. That's the fight. Get ready, you mother, for the big payback. Hey! Let me hit him. Hit him, Fred. Hit him. Hey, hey, hey! Lord! Lord!
Thanks, Jeff. And that was Payback from James Brown, released as a single in 1974. Jeff shares more of this advice on our blog. Swing by rockstarcmo.com and click on the Street Knowledge link on the homepage, or get in touch and let us know what you think. Right, it's that time of the week to wind down the week in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar with my friend and content marketing guru, Robert Rose, Chief Troublemaker at the Content Advisory, for a cocktail and a marketing thought. Good evening, Robert. What are you drinking?
Oh, hello, my friend, and welcome to the bar for the weekend. It's I don't know how it is where you are, but I am so ready for some nice fall weather. The leaves are changing.
Yes.
I mean, even here in Southern California, they're changing, which is nice.
Wow.
So what I have then, because whenever it gets to be the weather like this, a good, cool, crisp fall sort of evening, I want Italian food. And so there's nothing better to start the Italian meal and where we are than starting in the bar with a Negroni.
Yes.
And so we're going to have a Negroni this week. And it's just a lovely way, it's got the fall color to it. It's, and of course it's gin. So, always nice. And so, of course, it's very easy to make. You just have the 3/4 parts Campari to 1 part, I like to say, gin, and then basically a little bit, maybe 3/4, half part sweet vermouth, and then some people make it with carbonated water, or some make it with flat water. I love it with sort of sparkling water. It's nice. And then, of course, a wedge of lemon just to garnish all that off. And all you need to do is pour all that stuff together over ice, and you have yourself a lovely, lovely, lovely drink. Now, some people also do it neat, by the way. So I shouldn't. Some people will like their Negroni shaken and poured into a martini glass, but I like them over ice too.
So that would just be the Campari and gin? Is that the Negroni? Is that what you're saying, or do you always put the?
Well, no, you do the Campari, the gin, and the sweet vermouth, and then you can shake it all up into a shaker, and then just pour that into a martini glass, and maybe squeeze a little lemon in there, and have sort of a martini kind of Negroni, which I've had before, and is delicious. Yeah. Or you can just pour it over ice.
I think I've had the poured over ice, but I think I've had I don't recall having sparkling water in a Negroni, but I haven't had that many of them. I shall continue to experiment.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I am for the listeners. I am officially retiring the me making gin and tonic joke. So if we just have a moment just to let that joke die. Just in happy remembrance. I mean, we've done that joke hundreds of times. I think it's, and I will enjoy a gin and tonic review, and I think I will maybe make myself a gin and tonic prior to us recording next time. But unless anybody says to me, Ian, I love it when you make a gin and tonic, then please hit me up on the socials. But other than that, that's the end of the gin and
Otherwise,
tonic.
I think at this point they should know how to make a gin and tonic. So I think we're safe there.
So we're drinking a Negroni this week, and where are we going to take these lovely drinks? Where are we going to drink these lovely drinks?
Well, I think we should get up into the mountains because there is the mountains up near where I live, where the leaves actually do change quite a bit up there in the microclimate, and there's a place called Big Bear, which is a lake up in the mountains, not that far from my home. But it's a wonderful place, sort of think of a mountain lake with big pine trees and a lodge, and we can sit there and have some good Italian food and drink Negronis.
Yeah, I think was it last week we were also saying thing, because when you start talking about Italian food, I know that we're going to have a really nice glass of wine as well. Hanging around with you, my friend.
Oh, well, indeed, there's that as well. Yeah, the Negroni is only the start. That's our starting cocktail, and then we move on to we're going to move on to the Brunellos.
Yes.
And and then maybe something for after dinner, a grappa after dinner. Oh.
the other when was it? The week before last, I was at a management offsite in Split, which is very nice, and I started a meal with a martini, and the evening is going to go quite well after that. So, always like to start with a cocktail. Fantastic. All right, so we're having these.
I had a good friend of mine who used to. What he would do is he would sit down, and he would have before we got into wine, he would order some form of cocktail all the time, and he used to call it cutting the dust. Oh. He said, "Yeah, got to cut the dust." Nice. So you got to cut the dust with a cocktail, and then you're ready for some wine.
Nice. Yes, absolutely. All right, so we are in Big Bear in this lovely lodge, and we're looking at the lovely scenery. And obviously, because it's me and you, the conversation turns to marketing. What are we talking about this week?
Well, I think we're going to talk about what the opportunity now is coming. So one of the things that we joke about and have joked about, in addition to making gin and tonics, is sort of the collapse of Twitter and sort of the evolution of social media, which we usually save to the last part of this bit anyway. But I think we're at a point now, and as we sort of end October, come into November, and start looking at planning for 2024, one of the things that I think we need to start to acknowledge is that social media may be collapsing in on itself. It's a really, and I don't mean dying by any stretch. I just mean really fundamentally evolving. And so one of the opportunities I think that we have is, and the data seem to point to this, is the opportunity to change the nature of what we mean by social. And here's what I mean by that. So we can start to see, and there's all these charts out there, and we'll link them in the post that I can certainly, you'll link to in the show notes. All this data that's being gathered, there's a chart by Axios right now that shows the just sort of complete collapse of organic clicks to websites from Facebook and X, and basically where news, links to articles and news is just undeniably collapsing. Now, of course, a lot of this is strategic by the platforms, right? To whatever extent you think X is doing anything strategic, basically you can see that they are de-emphasizing links to external sites. And you can also know that Facebook, see what they're doing in Canada and see what they're doing elsewhere, are starting to de-emphasize news links and really try and get out of the news business and linking to other article sites. But we can also see, and we see it in CMI's research, we also see it in other data that, of course, we can also link to, that there's basically just a general decline in people posting full stop. And as I've mentioned, I think on this show, I've mentioned that we even saw this at Content Marketing World this year.
Yeah.
So the data is finally in from the complete event, and our Twitter activity from the entirety of the event was down 60%.
Wow.
LinkedIn activity was up by 20%, but I think that's sort of a wave. So you can definitely see that there's a gap even there. And Instagram was flat, roughly.
Right.
And so it means people are posting less, right? It just means that. And so my hypothesis right now is, as we sort of end the year, is that social media is becoming a lot less social and just more media. It's just becoming media. We're being TikToked, right? And I mean, basically it's becoming a media. It's becoming YouTube. It's becoming TikTok, where we consume media on social media platforms, but we don't create a lot of content on social media. Now, that obviously gives us an opportunity to become the content creator on social media, but that means looking at social media in a slightly different way. In other words, we stop valuing engagement, comments, and shares of our stuff and start rather measuring how it's helping us flow to our owned media platforms. And so that then gets us into, well, how do we start to, because it's not that people don't want to be social, right? They do want to be social. And we can see that in the data as well, is that attendance to both virtual events as well as physical events are also up. And so people do want to be social. They do want to get together in groups and talk about common things and actually be social with each other. But now they want to do it in event type spaces, whether physical or digital. And so that puts a new emphasis both on us as marketers to really put a big focus on events, both digital and physical, make them more social, and change the way that we create those interactions at those events so that they become the place where people in our ecosystems want to share that content, want to share pictures with each other, want to engage with us as a brand, but also then changes the nature of how we then publish out to social media and how we value social media, where now it becomes more of a content distribution network where we're trying to drive actions that bring people back into our own media sphere. So that's where I think we've got a big evolution going on, and something we can think about for early next year as a sort of evolution of what we're doing.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I think a few things here. So there was some coverage of the latest Twitter goings on BBC Today, and they had Ross Gerber, one of the early investors in Twitter, and he was like, the platform is dying. You know, there's so much evidence, isn't there, that despite all what they say, X itself is dying. And Dennis Shao, who was at Content Marketing World, you know, he missed it. He missed the fact there wasn't that great back channel going on Twitter. I mean, he saw that 60% cut as an attendee of the event, right? So your data, it correlates with his experience. And so in a way, the experience of people attending events is somehow diminished because they don't have the back channel anymore. And people used to love that. And I think one of the other things is you were on your own podcast, I think, and I was listening to that today. You made the point, you or Joe made the point that we had it lucky, you know, in 2009, that these platforms offered us an opportunity to grow organically and to promote and to work with us almost as a partner in growing our own media channels. But that's not the case anymore, right?
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, as Joe also pointed out on the podcast, that there are lots of new people that are making it work, right?
Yeah.
Even on X, to his point, where I'm still not, I mean, as you heard on the podcast, I'm still not completely convinced of. But he said, and there is data to support this, that you as a new content creator or you as a new marketer can, if you put a lot of effort into it, you can build a quote unquote community on Twitter, on X, right?
But the thing,
and you could do the same thing on Instagram, and well, you could certainly do it on TikTok. You can build an audience on TikTok, and that seems to be the version of our ease, quote unquote, in 2009 is now been transferred to TikTok, where, from what I hear, if you create good stuff, it's relatively straightforward to build a meaningful audience on TikTok because there's a lot of people consuming content on TikTok, and the algorithm is friendly for if you create a lot of consistently good content, you'll find people. So
but
it can be done, but it is no doubt much more difficult. But it still comes back to even if you believe in those sort of tributaries to the mainstream or main trend, it still all comes back to the main river of the emphasis being becoming the owned media that people are interested in, right?
Yeah.
You've got to become the place where, marketing now really is about becoming the source of interesting things for your customers, so that they not just visit there when you've got a buying need, but they visit there when they don't. They get value out of it when they're just in their regular lives, and so they start to depend on you as a brand to deliver entertainment, inspiration, information across all sorts of things.
Yeah, but then, so much so. Well, the very first point, of course, and it was the point you made about the fact that, and I'm reading this all over the place now, is the advice now is don't put any links into your social media stuff. You need to,
exactly, right? Create that scarcity and feed the algorithm, right?
Yeah, but you play, so we're playing within their walled garden, and we're playing by the rules, and we're on rented land. It's that's what I meant earlier when I said it was almost a partnership, right? Is that you could build your own media alongside supporting these social media channels by feeding them with content. It was content that had links in it, and building a community that had links in it. They take that away. You're only it's rented land. And absolutely. I mean, I can't dispute Joe saying that people are making a success of it, but they're making a success of it in the walled garden.
Indeed. Yeah. And I think what the smart ones are doing they are finding creative ways to have people flow to their owned media using that sort of tactic, right? Which is, everything from, put the link in the first comment or do it in a way where it says in the context of the text or the image that you post with it, that, more here, and make people manually put in the URL so that you sort of fool the algorithm to think that this is all about, an internal linkless post, but in actuality, it's you're telling people to go somewhere else to get more of this. Yeah. And the same, by the way, the same is true in email. We're seeing the same trend in email, right? Where successful email newsletters are not linking out to other things. What they're doing is everything is self-contained, right? The value is in the email itself. It's not about clicking out to the website or doing those kinds of things, but creating the scarcity by saying the only place you can get this content is within this email.
Yeah, that is slightly different, and it just seems like a good publication to your audience and a better experience. Whereas I think there's something different about the social media algorithms and their intent on keeping us and our content, on their platform and not sharing any of that love. You know what I mean by
right.
this. And the thing is, with this very podcast, I've been experimenting with creating the show notes as a LinkedIn post with the podcast embedded as a player in it, and also that thing about the I think that thing about the first comment being the link is going to go away, because I saw something the other day. I think LinkedIn is getting wise to that stuff as well. So we all find these little sneaky ways around it, and then the algorithm figures that out, and then you haven't got that either. So I think there is a definite trend, isn't there, to keep you creating content on their platform and not giving anybody the opportunity to go. And I think that's changed, hasn't it?
Agreed. Yeah.
I think I'm helping with your point where we got from we started off with the collapse of Twitter, and I think that's part of the collapse of Twitter, isn't it? Is that if you're going to create somewhere as your walled garden, you have to have faith in that community and nobody has faith in the Twitter community anymore in the same way as they used to, right?
Well, that's it, right? I mean, if you can't depend on people to share your social media posts, right? Because they're, or share your newest blog post or share your newest thing, if you can't depend on them because nobody's doing that anymore, or, when I say no one, I mean much fewer people are doing that anymore.
Yeah.
Then what you do is then what social media, it becomes literally like YouTube, right?
Yeah.
Where the reason you go into YouTube is to distribute your content on video, to basically provide for an easy way to stream video, and 2, to become a search engine, right? To become a place of discovery for whatever content you're talking about. Then it becomes a question of, okay, well, if that's the goal of my content on the social media platform is to distribute it and have it be a discovery engine, then the question is discovery of what, right? And so you go, okay, well, it's a discovery of my podcast, or it's a discovery of my webinar series, or it's a discovery of my website, discovery of my resource center. So you have to figure out clever ways to make people want to go find that without fouling the algorithm by putting a direct link in there.
Well, and the other thing for most content for many content producers, particularly in B2B, the content isn't the product. So if these platforms make it harder for you to link to your content off of their site, and it's the first link in a chain towards somebody becoming interested in you and your product, right? So that's a problem. And the other one is I was thinking about, weirdly enough, I was just thinking about RSS when you were talking just then, because that used to be our aggregator of choice, right? And then then Twitter became our aggregator of choice. But Twitter doesn't want to be our content aggregator. It wants to be our content library. It wants to host the content, doesn't it?
Exactly. Well, that's exactly it. It wants to be the walled garden, right? It wants to be the place where you live.
Yeah.
It wants to be the place where you never have to leave, that you can get all your content. It wants to be the internet, right?
Yeah.
So, and so that's the tension.
Yep.
But that means that social media is literally just becoming media, right? It becomes,
absolutely.
think about it. You don't get to go put a link on, BBC.
No.
You know what I mean? The BBC is just a linear feed. And the only difference between Facebook and the BBC is where they get their content, right? And so if BBC all of a sudden opened up its airwaves to say the best user-generated content is now going to be featured on the BBC, it would be what Facebook wants to be, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. The BBC is an interesting example because they have got so much content, and it's hard to compete in certain areas if you're an independent content producer. If the BBC in the UK is focusing on that topic, right? Because they say like you want to write about gardening or something like that, they've got a huge amount of content on things like that. It's anyway. Yes, that's a different rabbit hole for another day. But if people are wanting to go to a nicely tended walled garden where none of these bad things happen, where might they find that?
Well, if they're going to a walled garden, they won't find many with me. Our website, we've got 2 websites, I guess, to talk about, is our consulting, and where we post a lot of this kind of stuff is at contentadvisory.net.
Yes.
But finding myself doing a lot more coaching these days and a lot more promoting of my new book, which, of course, talks about these things. And they can find that at contentmarketingstrategy.com.
Splendid. And as I do share links in the show notes, I will include those links in the show notes. And when people spin the dial on the interwebs, where are they going to find you?
LinkedIn and Threads these days. I'm off Twitter completely.
Yes.
I've put out the no mas tapped out sort of sign on Twitter or X or whatever the hell it's called, and then I'm all in on Threads, and then LinkedIn, of course, is where I mostly.
Yeah, I would also recommend. Well, it was episode 399 of This Old Marketing Today, wasn't it?
It was indeed.
If people are interested in this conversation that you and Joe had about this very topic, then go look at episode 399 of This Old Marketing as well. So go check that out after you've listened to this, obviously. All right, mate. And most importantly for me, are you going to be in the bar next week?
I will definitely be in the bar next week.
I look forward to it, my friend. I'll see you there. And as Robert mentioned there, you can follow him and me actually over on Threads. I'll include a link in the show notes. So that's a wrap on episode 189, the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. I've been your host, Ian Truscott. Thanks to Jeff and Robert for sharing their insight, and to you for dropping a dime into your podcast jukebox, selecting our track and jiving along with us. You can find all our links and all the things we discussed in the show notes on rockstarcmo.com, along with our blog, newsletter, and all of our previous episodes. And please let us know what you think by the socials, or drop us a rating or review in your favourite podcast app, or just keep listening. I'm glad you're here. Next week, I'll be chatting with David Alexander, the CMO at Everbridge, and Robert will be back in the bar sharing his cocktails and a content marketing advice. But until then, have a great week, and I hope you can join us here next week on Rockstar CMO FM.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.